Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Particularly good morning to those people in the Americas, North, South, Middle, Caribbean, and of course anybody throughout the world who finds this the best time of day to enjoy this webinar. I'm Ian Buckland from GWO. Today's webinar is the second in a series of 3 we're doing around at a regional level, based around the Global Wind Workforce Outlook that GWO produce annually with our friends in GWEC, the latest version of which went live about 10 days ago after being launched in Japan. We're down a few people in terms of our panelists, but we're going to go ahead and start the webinar and hope they'll be able to join us shortly. With me on the call at this point is Andrea Scassola from GWO. He's Business Analytics Manager. We have Anjali Lathigara, who is Lead in Market Intelligence for the APAC region at GWEC, and our guest panelist, Jeremy Faria, who's Operations Coordinator, People and Performance at AMER Training from Brazil. We, as I said, are awaiting Elbia Ganum and Jennifer Palestrant. Hopefully they'll be joining us in the next few moments. This is a recorded webinar. We'll be putting that up on our YouTube channel within the next few days. The PowerPoint presentation that Andrea and Anjali will be have been preparing, will also be mailed out to all those participants who joined the call as a matter of courtesy, and then probably in the next 24 hours or so. I think it's over to Andrea, really, who is running the slideshow at this point. Andrea, take it away with the agenda slides.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, for the introduction. We went through the speakers. We will begin with the Global Wind Workforce Outlook, highlighting the methodology, where we found the data, then diving deeper into the report's findings, and then with Anjali, we will get deeper into US, Brazil, and Colombia, and then we'll open for panel discussion. So there are essentially 2 reasons why we believe that it's useful to forecast wind workforce in scope for industry standard training. One reason is, of course, visibility. This would help training providers allocate the supply capacity where and when needed. And the other is preparedness, because we hope that this can help align expectations across different stakeholders so that there is a correct match of demand and supply. So today we have essentially 4 questions. What's the size of the technician workforce from this year until 2027? How many people already have a training certificate that is valid as of today and in line with the wind industry standards? How many people need specific training in the Americas? And what are the main drivers for demand for workforce in each region and sub-region in the Americas? Finally, with Anjali, we'll focus on 3 specific countries. So in the wind industry, workforce is employed throughout several different phases of project development, but industry standard training takes place predominantly for work that is conducted during construction installation and operation and maintenance. So our workforce within this report, our workforce forecast for the segment of the wind project lifecycle are excluded for segments such as research and development, procurement, manufacturing, which is traditionally the most labor-intensive segment, at least in certain key markets, and transport and decommissioning. The result of our model is essentially the number of workers who need to be ready for the construction installation and operation and maintenance of the global wind fleet, both onshore and offshore. These numbers also reflect the number of the total number of people who need to have safety and technical skills during the outlook period of 5 years. The data foundation of the forecast are GWEC's capacity forecast, both annual and cumulative, inputs on turbine rating, and then project level data for both onshore and offshore wind projects. These data are also combined with inputs on the typical workforce needed for onshore and offshore wind projects on a people per turbine basis, which we estimate with real project data sourced from our member network. Then once we derive the number of operational turbines and the number of new turbines installed each year, we multiply by the respective people per turbine ratio. And finally, we obtain the number of people needed to build onshore and offshore wind assets each year, to build and maintain them. So starting from the baseline, GWEC produces industry-leading market forecast and expects that almost 700 gigawatts of wind capacity will be added in the world's grid during the next 5 years. This installation activity should leap up to an installed base of 1.6 terawatt by 2027. So since we focus on the workforce that works on both construction, installation, and on O&M, we use both forecasts as input to our model calculations. So let's look at both. As you can see from the graphs, workforce dynamics follow different patterns depending on the stage of project development. Since the cumulative capacity typically grows incrementally, demand for O&M workers grows in a linear way and without major fluctuations. On the other hand, demand for technicians involved in construction and installation is much more volatile, as you can see, because it follows annual installation trends. Throughout the outlook, there are some efficiency gains, and these are primarily associated with the increase in turbine rating. So typically, the number of people involved in the construction and in the maintenance of a turbine do not vary significantly based on the size of the machine. Therefore, as the outlook progresses, machines with higher ratings will tend to slow down the increase in the total number of people that are needed on a per megawatt basis. The global wind technician workforce is expected to increase by 17% over the next 5 years, from 2022 to 2027. Onshore wind addition increase at a stable annual rate, and therefore the demand for onshore wind technicians required for construction installation remains rather flat year over year. By contrast, we can see that offshore wind additions will grow quicker year on year, and therefore demand for technicians involved in offshore wind construction will grow more rapidly by comparison. O&M grows steadily together with the cumulative fleet, and this counts for both onshore and offshore. Overall, offshore wind will grow faster, but by the end of the outlook period, onshore wind will still represent the lion's share of the total workforce. Looking at the Americas, just like in Europe, there have been long-standing expectations for cost reductions in the last 10 or so years. And these expectations became less realistic during 2021 and 2022. Because when faced with the inflation, Western OEMs found themselves with limited options to pass over higher costs off to customers, and were forced to raise the turbine prices. And this caused hesitation for developers who had to review the cost assumptions of several projects and engage in longer turbine supply agreements, with the result that order intake slowed down and impacted the near-term outlook. So now, as you can see from the graph, the near-term outlook for the Americas is relatively flat, and growth is expected to accelerate again in 2025. In regards to workforce, we estimate that more than 100,000 people will need training to build and maintain onshore and offshore wind assets in the Americas. Workforce growth in the onshore C&I segment will be relatively flat, and this is the result of weakening construction activity in South America, especially in Brazil and Chile, which are also the largest markets in Latin America. And this sluggish activity will offset growth in North America. On the other hand, construction activity will drive up demand for construction workforce offshore, predominantly in North America. Also, demand for workforce will grow steadily in the O&M segment across all regions. More than 70% of the workforce needed to be employed in construction and maintenance will be concentrated in the US. The next markets with the largest demand for workforce will be Brazil, Canada, and Mexico. Looking at entry-level workforce expected in the Americas, there are primarily two forces that drive demand for entry-level workforce. One is obviously the demand for wind power, and therefore this growth is pegged to year-over-year market growth. And the other force is attrition, meaning the percentage of people in scope for industry training that leave the industry each year. If we had to generalize, we could say that attrition across the wind industry is around 6%. This means that on average, each year during the next 5 years, more than 8,000 workers in scope for industry training in the Americas will need to be entry-level workers. And these needs to be taken into account when creating training programs that are particularly suited to them. Technicians move, some work for different contractors and in different industries. Ultimately, they need a training certification to be able to work. So this means that typically established wind markets with a wide range of international employers have a healthy oversupply of certified technicians. And this is the case certainly in Europe, especially as offshore wind is concerned, but less so in the Americas. And this is because the industry standard training is a more recent achievement in the Americas, and adoption has been growing extremely fast during the last 2 years, especially in the US. So the workforce in scope for industry standard training in North America is much larger, as you can see from the graph, than that in Latin America. Also, if we think that the workforce needed in North America is expected to grow more significantly in the next 5 years, then we realize the urgency of building capacity to secure human resource, possibly locally. With this being said, I now leave the floor to Anjali from GWEC, who will give us an overview of the wind power markets in the Americas, and more specifically of the workforce needed in the US, Brazil, and Colombia.
Thanks, Andrea. Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning from wherever you are joining. I doubt if anybody is joining from India, but we are celebrating Dussehra today, and best wishes for Dussehra to any Indian joining us from India. So I think Andrea has built a very good foundation for me why we are selecting US, Brazil, and Colombia as a focus country for today's webinar and also for the report. But I would like to share a few data points why it is important and where the Americas stand when we see the global footprint. As you see in the chart, America stands on the third top position in terms of wind installation we forecast during next 5 years, and this growth will be driven majorly through the installation in Brazil, USA, Mexico, Chile, Colombia, and Canada. But the two markets, USA and Brazil, both are top two, comes under top 3 market in the ranking of the list for onshore wind installation, total onshore wind installation by end of 2022. So that's why it is important for us to see where the wind workforce, how the wind workforce outlook looks in these countries. So I would like to start with USA, and if we can go to the next slide. Yep. So this is to kind of give you a policy scenario, what is happening in US and why we see these numbers for next 5 years. So I think everyone knows that since the Biden administration has taken the command, wind market is kind of seeing the accelerated growth. Uh, when we talk about onshore wind, it has been historically driven by the tax credit criteria, and now the Inflation Reduction Act being kind of implemented in August 2022, GWEC market intelligence expects the sharp acceleration of wind installation growth in next 5 years and in the decade to come. Here you see in 2022, it was the lowest year in terms of the new installation, probably because of the supply chain constraints and also the grid connection issues. And also because I would like to quote the number, almost 10 gigawatt of capacity faced delays during 2022. And also most of the developers were waiting for more clarity on Inflation Reduction Act during 2022. But for next 5 year outlook, we are seeing the accelerated growth for onshore wind. And similar, if I talk about offshore wind, GWEC forecast almost 15 gigawatt of offshore wind installation between 2023 to 2027. And the slide shows exact number, what is the ambitious offshore wind installation target by 2030, also the floating offshore wind target by 2035, and the long-term vision to deliver 110 gigawatt by 2050. One of the other pillars apart from the Inflation Reduction Act is the technological funding and partnership deals. And also now that USA has opened its two zones, Southern Atlantic coast and also the Eastern Gulf of Mexico, as it was previously banned to kind of exploit for the maritime usages. But I would say that if we compare the target and the forecast for next 5 years, we are optimistic that this target for offshore wind can still be met by 2030, which is 30 gigawatt by 2030. But industry still seeks the policy support in terms of supply chain constraints, also the inflation rates in various commodities and raw materials, and the grid connection, the timely grid connection availability to evacuate the power generated. But there are some legacy issues where policy developments are still happening, such as kind of upgrading the port and other onshore and offshore relevant infrastructure. The unique scenario, which is currently we all are noticing, is the PPA renegotiation for the offshore wind capacity awarded already. That is because of inflation and supply chain constraints. So all in all, it shows that which are the opportunities or the areas we need to work on, and we demand for policy support. But if I talk about the positive side of it, and what is the gigawatt number still in the pipeline for offshore wind is, and I quote that almost 50 gigawatt of offshore wind project pipelines are under development, with 32 leases in active development, and Bureau of Ocean Energy Management expects to kind of allow and review almost 16 construction and operation plans by 2025, which will be worth of more than 27 gigawatt. So this numbers kind of gives a very positive outlook and how government is working towards resolving issues and also providing conducive ecosystem for offshore wind to flourish. I would again go back to Inflation Reduction Act, which is one of its kind as a package, which does not only focuses on investment but also plans the wind and permitting, and also provides criteria to reform the legislation to support the wind installation in the market. So while this report focuses on construction and maintenance wind for workforce needs, we think that almost 1.2 times of what workforce was needed in 2022, it will be required up to 2027. And apart from this, almost tier 2 and tier 3 wind supply chain will require trained and qualified workforce to work on building the manufacturing capacity as well. So this gives a very positive outlook for all of us, and I would like to kind of know more about how Jennifer kind of shares her experience while working in the USA market. Now I would like to focus more on Brazil. If you can go to next slide. Yep. So as you look in the chart, 2020 shows that almost 4 gigawatt was installed during 2022, and the growth has kind of declined between 2023 to 2027, but we are still seeing the healthy performance. And this is basically Eolica's expectation, which kind of expects almost 16 gigawatt installation of onshore wind in next 5 years. Eolica and GWEC is of the opinion that it is a conservative case because of we are aware about ongoing policy developments which can unfold various opportunities and can increase this 3 gigawatt number moving ahead. So this is again the climate-friendly, administration-driven wind market, not just only for wind, but also for overall economic growth and job creation within the Brazilian industry. For onshore wind, now we are seeing that one of the policy developments we have seen is that shift from the regulated auctions towards corporate PPA based power procurement. This is again gives the free market kind of scenario for everyone to play the role. And everyone will take time to adjust to the shift, and we can see this declining trend moving upward when everyone is adjusted and understands this shift very well. But there are some of the the issues that needs to be worked upon, which is the transmission related challenges, availability of grid connection when plant is being commissioned, and also we are seeing the lower energy demand kind of predicted than expected. So but this gives another opportunity to kind of export the power from Brazil using the renewable energy and wind as specifically. Now Brazilian wind industry is also uniquely positioned to exploit its offshore wind and generate the green hydrogen. And I think Eolica is working and very supportive for kind of creating a consolidated policy framework and the regulatory framework to kind of focus on synergies between offshore wind and green hydrogen. The first offshore wind tender is expected to come in 2023, but we think that it will likely be launched or awarded in 2024 because the legislation is still kind of pending to be approved in November. Of course, there are several other policy developments, for example, federal decree being kind of introduced and allowing the one-stop shop system for offshore wind development. Then taking on this development, I think it's worth to mention what oil and gas energy giant of Brazil, which is Petrobras, working on huge offshore wind plants. And it is also interesting. It will be also interesting to see equation between Petrobras being oil and gas and other private sector, how it unfolds to grab the offshore wind tender capacity. Because it is kind of associated and concerned kind of grabbing the seabed lease, where the oil and gas energy giant already working, and there will be also higher upfront cost for first offshore wind. But the numbers are very large for the first offshore wind tender, almost tens of applications giving total 170 gigawatt capacity are kind of received for review. So all in all, this gives a very positive outlook for Brazil as well. And now it kind of leads me to talk more about the emerging market, as Andrea also mentioned in his slides before, which is Colombia. So this is relatively emerging market, as I said, after Mexico, and it kind of also shares 10% share in the onshore wind addition for next 5 years outlook within the Latin America or Americas region. What to mention that Colombia is highly dependent on hydropower, and it is high time that it works on diversifying its grid and also have reliable renewable energy based energy mix, which will support its long-term target to reach net zero by 2050. In terms of wind power procurement, it started spurring, after energy transition law kind of enacted in 2021, which allows power generation from the non-conventional fuel-based resources, therefore the wind. And also the other commendable development around La Gujera wind farm, where authorities are kind of working relentlessly to resolve the issues around societal acceptance and permitting, and also providing the grid connection on time. Another good example is 1.2 gigawatt wind tender in March 2023, which also houses 350 megawatt of offshore wind capacity. In terms of the outlook, GWEC market intelligence forecast almost 2.2 gigawatt capacity to be added for onshore wind in next 5 years, which is upward kind of outlook for us. But in terms of offshore wind, we are seeing very good initiatives being taken in Colombia. It has become the member of Global Offshore Wind Alliance as well recently. And for those of you kind of don't know what is Global Offshore Wind Alliance, it is kind of initiative founded by government of Denmark, IRENA, and GWEC in last September to kind of drive the offshore wind uptake through political mobilization and creation of global community to kind of practice the initial aim to or at least achieve the 380 gigawatt of offshore wind installation by 2030 and 2000 gigawatt by 2050, which is like 35 gigawatt on an average each year through 2020s, and a minimum of 70 gigawatt annually from 2030 globally. So it is a good forward pathway for Colombia to be a member and see the progress for offshore wind. Apart from this, I would like to also highlight what are the policy areas which requires the attention to to ensure this growth happens timely. So to mention from the societal acceptance to permitting delays, also the infrastructure expansion for grid connection, the port readiness for offshore wind development, and the supply chain availability are the critical part and ask of the industry to kind of invest in the Colombia. All in all, we are seeing a very good outlook for Americas, and not to mention when the wind installation happens, it automatically converts into a larger need of wind workforce, and we are also seeing the good trend of the wind workforce needs, not just in onshore but also a good numbers in offshore wind coming up in after 2027, or I would say towards 2027. So with this, I would like to end my presentation and hand it over to Ayan back. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. And Andrea was also before then. We've been joined now by Jennifer Palestrant, who's Senior Vice President of Public Affairs at Invenergy Offshore Wind. Good to see you, Jennifer, and thank you for joining us. We also have with us Jeremy Faria, who represents almost the other example, as we discussed today, the different sort of onshore-offshore balance and current established market versus growth in the US market. So very useful sort of presentation here, and very different sort of factors happening in the other ends of the continent. Jennifer, if I can call on you in the first instance, Anjali was giving us a great sort of overview of the policy support that's happening within the US offshore market at the moment, and asked the very pertinent questions about how it is to experience it as a developer and an operator in the US. What's your experience of the attitude of the Biden administration, and of course technological funding and the partnership deals which are open to your imminent development in Virginia? And I can't hear you, unfortunately. Virginia is Jennifer. Jennifer, you seem not to be on the call at this point. That's a shame. You can't get the sound anyway. Try again. This sounds more like it. I wonder why.
Any better now?
That's coming through loud and clear.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, good morning, everyone from Virginia, from the East Coast of the United States. My name is Jennifer Palestrant with Invenergy. I am also the former Director of Offshore Wind for the state of Virginia, and actually did workforce development for many years for one of our community colleges here. So workforce is near and dear to my heart. And, you know, at the end of the day, it is what truly underpins any major new industrial activity. Without a highly qualified, highly trained workforce, we don't go forward. And so it is something that we are incredibly dedicated to, very focused on. And in the United States, we really, especially on the East Coast, around offshore wind specifically, we really do look at offshore wind as a marriage to our 400-year-old maritime economy. Very similar skill sets, working at sea, working at heights, all of those type of things. And so they really do are this perfect marriage of this brand new industry for the U.S. that we call offshore wind. From the onshore side, Invenergy has about 30 gigawatts of power, either under development or completed, much of it through the Great Plains of the United States, with large sections of onshore wind. And so the U.S. has built a really great onshore workforce, much of it using GWO, some of it using its own, individual training. And so we've seen that grow very successfully. And so now we're looking to the offshore market, and certainly with GWO is required in the offshore market, in terms of how do we stand this up? And while we have 30 we've got at least we've got a target of 30 gigawatts by 2030. We currently only have 8 turbines spinning actually in the United States, and so that means that there's a lot of growth there, and so the question then gets to be, how do we set up people for success? How do we start training that pipeline that we know is coming, and still have people have jobs? And so one of the things that we're doing is we're doing a lot of work around hybrid training, where people are being trained, for example, as electrical contractors, but then they're also having the GWO training added in, so that in another couple of years, when we have a whole lot more than 8 turbines spinning, they are qualified and certified to work offshore if that's what they choose to do.
So actually those electricians are working in the manufacturing side of things onshore at the moment, and then you'll move them off. Is that the thought?
Yeah, either they're working on an onshore farm, or actually they're here a little bit here on the East Coast. They tend to be working in the shipyards, so they're building aircraft carriers and submarines, and then we'll look to go offshore.
Great. Are you finding that the state of Virginia is equally invested in this sort of endeavor, or are you fighting the bureaucracy behind the scenes?
There's always bureaucracy, no matter where you are. But no, everybody, I have to say that the states have really embraced offshore wind from a training and a workforce development standpoint. They really are looking at how do we grow these, and how do we partner up with whether it's a high school or a training school, the union, a union apprenticeship program. How do we partner these things up to get skilled trades set up, but then also to get GWO certifications set up as well.
And community colleges are involved in these sort of.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Community colleges are very much the cornerstone of much of what we do.
Jeremy, are you finding that in Brazil the community colleges are equally involved, or is it tertiary education, or is it very much a training provider route to upskilling?
I think it's a mixture of both. A lot of people choose to go via training providers, but there are also technical schools, as they're called over in Brazil, that help young and upcoming professionals to get into the wind market by providing specific wind-focused training. So yes, a nice balance between the two.
And are you sort of finding that people are coming to you to asking advice about how they become wind technicians, or are you finding that they're coming up through the colleges, or what's the sort of route into the upskilling process in terms of a new entrant to the market?
So from a training provider's point of view first, the more we are recognized as training providers for the wind energy in Brazil, the more we seem to attract people to come to us for exactly that advice to get on board. So yes, we get a lot of calls, especially from people who are looking for jobs, or people who have recently graduated university, high school, technical school. They would call us up to ask, how do I get into the wind industry? And we help them by pointing them in the right direction regarding GWO training, and what are the possibilities, whether it is construction and installation or maintenance. Parallel to that, those who go through the technical schools are already given a window into the wind energy world, so to speak. So they basically they leave the school, or they leave the training with that knowledge on whose doors they can go knocking to get on, to get into the industry.
Yeah. And Jennifer, do they come knocking on your door? Or are you keen to go out there and open the door for them? Because
Oh
I know
no,
that
we're definitely keen to open the door. No, when I was at the community college, they definitely came knocking. And now we're just always looking for, you know, good new opportunities, good candidates, and we're really starting with our programs in middle school. So, you know, 11, 12, 13-year-old students. So, for example, we have a survey ship off of New York, and she'll be in for resupply here in another month or so. And so we're teaming up with some of our partner schools, Boys and Girls Club, to bring the kids out and have them actually be able to tour the ship, you know, and talk about surveying and renewable energy and offshore wind, so that they can really start to get a feel for it, you know, early, because if you open that opportunity to them at that age, then all of a sudden their world gets much bigger in terms of what they can do long term in their lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. How about the sort of Biden administrations? Are you finding that there's a big opportunity coming up through the policy support of the Biden administration? Is it increasing the just how tough it is to get new entrants into the expanding field versus traditional occupations such as heavy industry and the oil and gas sector, of course? Is that something which you recognize, that competition is getting much more hard now that there's a greater demand?
You mean in terms of demand for workforce, or?
Yes. Yeah.
It is. There's no doubt. You know, I used to joke that if I could train 250 welders a week, I'd be the most popular person in the state. You know, we don't have enough. You know, we certainly had it for the last 30 or 40 years, had a big push towards everybody goes to university, which is great, except that in doing that, it depleted our skilled trades population as they were coming up, and so without that push and that you know, that other very acceptable path of you can support a family well, as with a solid set of credentials, it's harder to make that argument, which is why we're starting so early, when you have multiple generations who have come up through skilled trades or through union apprenticeships. It's a much easier conversation because you're used to, you know, it's something that you're used to and you see all the time. But trying to expand people's thoughts around what does a career look like, you know, and one of the things we really try to stress also is that just because you come out of high school and you get your certifications and you go straight to work does not mean that you're not going to college. Most of our really good apprenticeship programs here absolutely put you through, you come out with a community college degree, so a 2-year degree, and most of them will put you through a 4-year degree or even a master's in engineering, depending on your point, you know, depending on your skill set and what you want to do. And so we're really trying to help educate people that it's not one or the other, but that it can be both.
Absolutely. I would put the same question. We have Jeremy on the line also, of course, here, who's a trainer by profession. Are you finding bottlenecks also in the upskilling of instructors to deliver this training for those newbies looking to enter the sector too? Because we've got a bit of a chicken and egg here if we're not sort of increasing the number of instructors within the sector at the same time. Jeremy, you've got a perspective on that, I'm sure.
Yes, in Brazil, I think it is, as we say over there, half a dozen for six, or six for half a dozen. It seems to be going equally. As the demand goes up, we get the demand for instructors following closely. So for now, at Maersk Training Brazil, we have not run into any issues as yet, but I do know of other places that have had problems with finding properly skilled instructors. And that there because the demand shot ahead of the supply of instructors. How will that play out over the next couple of years? I don't know. But given the slight drop in demand overall in the wind industry in Brazil, what seems to be taking place now is a slight export of Brazilian technicians. I know of Brazilian technicians going to other Latin American countries and even the US to work in the wind industry. And that's just going to domino effect down to increase that demand. So while the Brazilian industry may not increase its demand, the fact that we've started exporting technicians, I see it being constant or even increasing demands for GWO training within the industry in Brazil.
And Andrea, you certainly did some work earlier in the year about transborder training. Is this something, a trend you're noticing across the world?
Yeah, this seems to be the case, especially because in Brazil, as Anjali said earlier, there is a decrease in the number of technicians needed as a result of the decrease in number of annual megawatts that are installed every year. So we should definitely expect that, especially in a situation where certified personnel is also working for international companies that are therefore active across boundaries. So it is something that we are seeing. And in the case of Brazil, it's not only, it's also something that should be expected.
Yeah. And Jeremy, you of course train people from across South America yourselves as Maersk training. So something you would promote, in fact.
Yes. We've had clients and technicians trained from a number of different countries. Even Europeans going over to Brazil who work in Brazil, it's just easier for them to train in Brazil with us, and that has been the case. So we have South American clients, a couple of European clients coming over, and we've even trained some North Americans who work in Brazil. So yeah, we're quite spread out in terms of client base.
And Jennifer, I mean, you're looking for a vast expansion. Is foreign workforce a possibility or something you're investigating or have discovered yourself?
I think we're looking at all possibilities. Immigration tends to be a challenge for bringing technicians in from out of the country unless they're at a fairly high level. And so it's one of those things that we're definitely working on with the State Department, because you can't just teach somebody how to attach a blade 800 feet in the air overnight. It's a very detailed, very long process. And we're looking for by your study, we're looking for 65,000 new employees in the next 5 years. That's a lot of people. So I think we're looking everywhere we can to find new talented workforce.
No, I'm sure you are. It's a global issue, of course, which is something which our report is very keen to point out, that even in countries where there's a stagnation, the upward prospect is always upwards. Anjali was asking particularly about policy support in the US. Anything you look forward to in the future in terms of loosening up a further policy support or tightening in terms of being more precise in terms of where you need support? Jennifer?
Whenever we can make policies for the industry better, or more conducive to growth. Certainly that's a good thing. So,
Yeah.
the IRA is phenomenal, and it's been just a huge growth. We've seen well over 20+ % growth just in this last year since the IRA was passed. There's still some areas in there around, expanding the definition of energy communities, for especially around port communities where, can't build an offshore wind farm without really good port facilities.
Yeah.
And so being able to expand in there, getting some more specificity from the Department of Treasury around domestic content, and how we, how that can be defined, especially because honestly, we're looking at, the bulk of the first generation of wind farms, the turbines, the cabling, almost everything will be coming, including the foundations, will be coming from overseas. It will be coming from Europe. And so how do we get through these next few years while an American supply chain is being built out? And so, we're seeing, and so that's one, the IRA is one. We're seeing really good, some really good research grants and research opportunities coming out from the Department of Energy, really looking at, especially around transmission, around, and then new technology opportunities. And then for workforce, it's just the continual conversation of these jobs are coming. What do these jobs look like? If we're bringing an offshore wind farm, what are the top 30 jobs, and how do we start getting ready, and how do we start training for those? So it's we've got a very rapid ramp up in front of us, but generally speaking, we're getting good support from DC and from the states.
Great. And Jeremy, I mean, it's a shame that Albia isn't here to talk about the situation in terms of where Eolica is working in terms of developing the industry within the offshore sector of Brazil. But any sort of knowledge you have in terms of the Power to X and detail around about the work that Petrobras is doing in terms of offshore development?
The sheer size of Petrobras and its influence in Brazil means that the fact that they have now focused on the wind industry, or specifically the offshore wind industry, I see that as, a definite. The Petrobras is huge, and when they set their mind to doing something, it usually happens. So the fact that they have put in loads of licensing requests, and they are working towards it, whatever their projections are, it's pretty much guaranteed that it will happen. But on a global standard, they are a huge company. It's not just huge in Brazil, but so whatever they say will basically happen. They've got the resources to back up their intention, and consequently, that's good news for Brazil and the Brazilian wind industry, specifically the offshore wind industry. So, yes, I believe it will happen, and soon.
And the transitioning workforce is likely to come from Petrobras's oil and gas workforce, or is there a parallel growth going to happen within a new entrance?
I foresee more parallel growth happening rather than a transition. At this moment, I have some ex-oil and gas colleagues who have already transitioned, but one would have expected a higher percentage of transitions by now, but it's not happening, and that's because oil and gas is paying better at this moment. Right? Yes. So unless that equals up or inverts, then I don't see people readily leaving a higher paying salary to go to one that's less, unless it's for convenience and working close to home on land or close to home offshore. Other than that, I don't see transitions being very big, but definitely parallel development of the workforce, yes.
And Jennifer, you were suggesting there might be more of a route in from the maritime industry certainly in Virginia. Is that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing that really all along the East Coast, where, especially shipbuilding, ship repair, again, very similar skill sets, people who are used to being at sea. One of the areas that we're really looking at working hard for recruiting is our veterans, as folks who are transitioning out of the military, especially Navy, Coast Guard, who are used to working at sea, who are used to being gone for, 2 to 3, well, they're used to being gone for months, but for offshore wind, a 2 to 3 week rotation for them is like heaven. And so they're, and they're very interested in renewable energy. Our Department of Defense here in the U.S. has some very specific decarbonization goals that it has to meet in the next 10 years. And so, looking at those veteran populations make phenomenal employees, and they're always up for a good adventure.
Oh yeah. We're coming up to 1656 here in Copenhagen, and so we're sort of last comments really. Would Andrea or Anjali have a question for either our guests, and perhaps any follow-up from the guests? Anjali.
Yeah, I have a question for both Jeremy and Jennifer. Starting with Jennifer, during writing the country commentaries, I came across that in US, the Wind Energy Technology Office, WETO, kind of works on giving the targeted investment opportunities to increase the workforce in the wind sector. And I think it would be great to know if you have any overview or the experience of it. What is the practical reality? How it is helping in kind of creating or obtaining the workforce by investing in it.
Unfortunately, I don't have any experience with that, but now I'm going to have to go look it up. So some of our onshore team might, but now, unfortunately, I don't have any.
That's the sign of a good question, Anjali. So
Okay.
Okay.
And next, for Jeremy, I do feel the absence of Albia from Alika, but this is more of kind of not a training perspective question, but kind of energy demand or the prediction kind of question, because we are seeing multiple opinions that there will be a lower energy demand expected than what predicted in next 5 years or so. But I think Brazil has a good opportunity to decarbonize its industrial sector, and since now the corporate PPAs are in place and regulated auctions are kind of decreasing, how do you think that this is going up in real terms? Have you seen such on ground activities happening in kind of industry level for decarbonization, wind playing its part in it?
To a small level, yes, because these new PPAs have just been implemented, or these new policies have just been implemented. So they haven't really taken full effect as yet, but there is a tendency indeed for major companies they have started the conversation of looking at greener sources of energy, and that is positive because they are going to be looking very closely at wind being that new source of energy. Solar is definitely something they are looking at also, given the speed at which a solar farm can be assembled. But in terms of footprint, a wind turbine tends to have a smaller footprint, and the overall consensus is that it's probably going to be hybrid, a mixture of both. But a short answer is yes, the major companies are looking at how to clean up their carbon footprint in a very, very near future.
Great.
Well, we have hit the hour, which is our slotted. We have some great conversations, which is really interesting to hear, both from the Brazilian and in contrast to the USA's position in terms of their market. I'm going to wrap it up there, and with thanks to our speakers today, to Jennifer Palestrant, Senior Vice President of Public Affairs at Invenergy Offshore Wind. Thank you for today, and Jeremy Faria, who had the last word almost in terms of MERS training's point of view from Brazil. He's operations coordinator, people on performance. And on the home team, we have Anjali Lathigara from GWEC. Thank you for your useful and always interesting views on what's happening in the country commentaries. And last but not least, Andrea Scassola from GWO. As I said, this webinar has been recorded and we will put it up on our YouTube site within the next few days. It generally takes 24 hours for YouTube to process these. And we will forward the PowerPoint presentation to those people that participated in the call. And that's it for today. Thank you very much. There's another GWWO webinar in 10 days for the Asia Pacific region, and those of you that are joining all three will see some of the same faces again at that point. Thank you for now, and have a good day wherever you are around the world. Thank you.